Did you get the tip? Someone in Advance Wars is hiding their true identity. Perhaps it's Jugger, the robot guy from Dual Strike. It's been theorized that Jugger is actually being controlled by the leader of Black Hole, Von Bolt. After all, no one's seen them together in the same cutscene. To be honest though, there's no real evidence supporting this theory, so maybe Jugger is just Jugger. How about Sturm, the enigmatic original leader of Black Hole, who can call meteors from space and is constantly vaping? I mean, it seems pretty obvious that he was inspired by Vader, but seriously, what is going on with the vape mask? If we take that off, would he die? Oh, maybe some questions are best left unanswered. But who the f is Sensei? After all, Sensei is really strange.
Airborne assault.
Introduced in Advance Wars 2, Sensei is the sensei of Kanbai, Grimm, and... wait a second. His name is Sensei? Well, that's what they call him, but if he's hiding his name, he might also be hiding an alternate identity behind those goggles. Sensei is pretty obviously based on World War II era fighter pilots, and his old age reinforces the idea that this isn't his first Advance War. But what if I told you there was some actual history to the character? First, let's look at his name. On top of being used like the English noun teacher, Sensei is also an honorific. Honorifics are suffixes attached to the name of someone to designate their role or relationship to the speaker. So if Sensei were his real name, Kanbai would be calling him Sensei Sensei in Japanese. This isn't always the case, of course. In some contexts, one might drop Sensei's name and just refer to him as Sensei, or drop the suffix and just refer to him as Sensei, except they don't, because his name isn't Sensei. This probably isn't too surprising. After all, a lot of characters change their names in translations, but despite the game being made in Japan, almost none of the characters' names are Japanese either. Let's take a look. Sami's name is Domino, Lash's name is Kyato, Hawk's name is Haku, and Adder's name is Sneiku. These aren't translations, in case you were wondering. The Japanese word for cat is neko, not Kyato. These are transliterations, meaning a word in one language which represents a word in another. These are essentially just English words and names, which sort of begs the question why they bothered changing them. Well, except for Sturm, whose Japanese name is Hellbozu, meaning Hell Monk. Though some fans speculate that it might have actually been Herr Bos, the German words for Mr. Evil, it seems as though Nintendo has sided against this interpretation, though I personally consider the matter yet still unsettled. Even still, Yellow Comet seems to be the only country where all the COs actually have Japanese names in Japanese. Sonya's name is Asuka, Grimm's is Kozo, and Kanbai is Kukichio. Interestingly, both of Kanbai's names are names of the Seven Samurai from the old Kurosawa film, Seven Samurai. So maybe this name change were the translator's way of flexing their extensive knowledge of classic film trivia, or maybe there's a secret other reason we'll get into a little bit later. Regardless, if the translator's goal was simply to Americanize these names, Kanbei and Sensei are still Japanese names, which is interesting because Kanbei and Sonya were given redesigns in the international release of Advance Wars to look decidedly less Japanese. This was taken a step further in the unreleased Chinese version of Advance Wars, where Kanbei looks happy, to say the least. You probably noticed I very obviously skipped out on telling you Sensei's Japanese name to build tension. Well, you'll be happy to finally know that Sensei's true name is Yamamoto. Though if his name is taken from someone else, then which Yamamoto is not such an easy question to answer. Akira Yamamoto was an ace fighter pilot in the Japanese Navy during the Second Sino-Japanese War and World War II. An ace is defined as having downed at least 5 enemy aircraft, and Akira was credited with a whopping 13. He died on November 24, 1944 after being shot down while intercepting a B-29 bombing mission over Japan. In spite of having the most impressive aerial combat record of all the Yamamotos, he doesn't share the same visual resemblance the next two do with Sensei. Ichiro Yamamoto was another ace fighter pilot during World War II, with a record of downing 11 enemy aircraft. Born in a fishing village in the Ehime Prefecture, he joined the Marine Corps right after graduating high school. World War II was the only war he fought in, and it was also the war he died in. In a book called Japanese Navy Fighter Corps II Ace Retsuden, published April 1st, 2011, credits his birthday as June 19, 1918, which would mean that he was shot down in the Battle of the Philippine Sea on his 26th birthday. But the most notable Yamamoto is Isoroku Yamamoto, a former Kaigan Gensui, head honcho of the Japanese Navy. Isoroku had attained the highest rank one could be in the Japanese Navy before the restructuring following World War II, and Isoroku was also assigned the commander-in-chief of the Combined Fleet, the main seafaring component of the Japanese Navy. Yamamoto himself had a big role in orchestrating the attack on Pearl Harbor, a day which still holds particular significance to Americans. The American military had their sights on Isoroku, and so after they intercepted and decrypted a message which contained flight details regarding Yamamoto's inspection tour of the South Pacific, plans to kill him were set into motion. On April 18th, 16 American fighters intercepted and shot down the bomber Yamamoto was on board. On the day of his death, he was photographed saluting Japanese naval pilots, many of whom were dressed in a particularly familiar garb. All these potential real-life connections might sound strange given that Advance Wars characters are not usually based on real figures. I mean, obviously. But fans around the world have speculated that this is because Sensei isn't an Advance Wars character. He's from a time before, Super Famicom Wars. Super Famicom Wars is the second entry in the Wars series, and it's both considered an enhanced remake and a sequel to the original Famicom Wars, which began the series. Super Famicom Wars included multiple characters who are direct references to real-world people, such as Billy Gates and Hitler. Yeah, this game never had an international release. It also included Mr. Yamamoto. Aside from the fact that Mr. Yamamoto and Sensei both share a name, these characters also share a surprising commonality. In Super Famicom Wars, individual units can rank up after engaging in combat. Mr. Yamamoto's troops start at rank 2, giving him the strongest units in the game. Ganbe, Sensei's only disciple in Advance Wars 2, also has the strongest units in Advance Wars. This connection has caused fans to seriously believe that Sensei is an older version of Mr. Yamamoto, and it's even the only trivia listed on his wiki article. However, while Sensei is Yamamoto, Mr. Yamamoto is already old and doesn't really look like Sensei. Additionally, I don't think he's any of these Yamamotos either. For one, Mr. Yamamoto clearly does not look like Isoroku, and he's pretty obviously not based on the other two either. He wears a monocle and has a fluffy white mustache. In fact, Mr. Yamamoto looks a whole lot more like Yamamoto Ganhoyo, also known as Yamamoto Ganbe. Ganbe. Fluffy mustache? Check. Funny hat? Check. Alive at the same time as Hitler? Also check. Sixth son of a samurai, Yamamoto Ganbe was an admiral of the Japanese Navy and twice Prime Minister of Japan. Unlike the other Yamamotos, Ganbe never lived to see the start of World War II. Born November 26, 1852, he was already 61 at the start of World War I. His first reign as Prime Minister was short-lived, resigning over what is now known as the Siemens Scandal. In the scandal, members of Ganbe's cabinet were accused of taking kickbacks from the government's purchases of warships and weaponry. At first, they only bought naval contracts from the industrial powerhouse Siemens AG, in exchange for 15% of the contract being paid secretly to the Japanese naval authorities who negotiated it. Vickers, another manufacturer of warships and weaponry, wanted in on the Japanese market, so they agreed to a more lucrative deal for the corrupt Japanese officials to sell the Congo battlecruiser. Siemens felt double-crossed by this deal and leaked the details of these arrangements to the press, resulting in the Japanese Army, Navy, and military police launching investigations into these allegations. If any of this reminds you of how Ganbe spends an extra 20% on his units in Advance Wars, remember that Ganbe's Japanese name is Kikuchio, so if there is an intentional connection here, it would have been put there by the translators, who I guess would not have simply been Kurosawa film buffs. Ganbe himself was never confirmed to be involved, but resigned with the rest of his cabinet anyway. But 10 years later, he would find himself prime minister yet again. At the time, the prime minister, Kato Tomosaburo, died of cancer, and a week later, the Great Kanto earthquake ravaged Honshu for 10 minutes and caused firestorms which killed 38,000 people. Ganbe was then recalled as prime minister to help rescue the Japanese government from the ensuing disarray. Once again, his reign was short-lived, only lasting several months before resigning due to a controversy which arose as a result of a radical attempting to assassinate Prince Regent Hirohito. While I firmly believe that Mr. Yamamoto is named after Yamamoto Ganbe, I actually think that Sensei is inspired by a much more mundane Yamamoto, introducing Masao Yamamoto. Masao Yamamoto was born in 1955 in Kyoto, and shortly after graduating from the University of Kyoto, he was hired as a computer programmer for Nintendo's R&D1. Masao is credited as working on 37 different games, from Donkey Kong Jr. to Smash 4, and both the first two Advance Wars games in between. He's also credited in the original Famicom Wars, so I suppose there's no evidence that both these Yamamotos aren't named after Masao, but it's pretty obvious to me which one bears more visual similarities to him. Also worth noting, there's one other Yamamoto credited in Advance Wars 1 and 2, but I can't find anything about them. There's little extra evidence to support the idea that Sensei and Mr. Yamamoto are the same character, or even that their stories are connected, or even that they're based on the same person. But that's because he's not the commanding officer hiding his identity. Enter Caroline. Caroline is another commanding officer in Super Famicom Wars, and she bears a striking resemblance to Nell. Not only do they share similar aesthetics, they both deal bonus luck damage at random as their unique CO powers. The only real difference is that Caroline's name is Caroline and Nell's Japanese name is Catherine. And maybe Nell is the imposter, but if she is, she's not the only one. It's not important if Nell and Caroline are the same person or just relatives, because the real culprit is someone else. Someone who's been hiding in plain sight this whole time. Introducing Grit. In the story, Grit explains that he was previously aligned with Orange Star, and it's implied that he had a prior relationship with Nell, but now works under Olaf for Blue Moon, for some reason. You could say he's a freelancer CO, like the ones in Super Famicom Wars. But why would he be one of the Super Famicom Wars COs? Well, for starters, Grit's name isn't Grit, it's Billy. What other Billy was an unaffiliated commanding officer who would have known a lucky blonde lady? Yep, Billy Grit here is Billy Gates, all grown up. Okay, yeah, his name is pretty obviously derived from Billy the Kid, the famous Western outlaw who killed a suspected 21 people in just his short 21 years, but, I mean, he could be both. To be honest, the only reason I started this video was because I lost to Mangs who played Sensei on the high funds ladder, and, I don't really know how I got to this point, so bye.